Hi everyone, it's Rita. I wanted to do a quick share about biophotons. And if you're not familiar with biophotons, I'm reading through Cindy Dale's Subtle Energy book. And then I've watched some other things on biophotons. I was blessed to study with a guy who taught Barbara Brennan. And for those who know about her work, decades ago, she created healing centers all over the earth. And she used Dr. Jim Cox's body typology in her work, in her book, her first book about the healing light hands or something like that's the name of her first book. But he had told me, this is back like in 2014, 2015, to look into biophotons. And I remember at the time, I was kind of like, I kind of like totally trusted anything he said to me. And I didn't know really much about all this stuff. And I remember telling him, like, I can't believe I'm able to do this, I'm able to do that. And he was like, Rita, it's all remembering. So I've tried to remind people here on this channel that this is all about remembering. And if you're new to my channel, my name is Rita Lorraine Carey. I'm an Akashic Records reader and accessor. I'm a creator. I started a film project that's all about you, the revelation of you. And it was exploring the auric fields, and initially, like, we brought crystals into the auric field, what that was doing for us. And it turned into so much more. And I've got some interviews I'm doing with some scientists around this. But I just want to get back to this Fritz Albert Popp, who was German. And I remember when Jim told me to look into biophotons, I went online to try to find a book on it. The only book I could find was on eBay, and it might have been Amazon, but it was like in German, and it was like $500. And I remember thinking, there's something here that is not being shown to us, you know. And this is before I'm real present now that there's a lot of things that have been not shown to us. And so you can keep scrolling if you're not in that mindset. But we are energy and light beings, and that's what this Dr. Popp had discovered. Somebody else had actually already discovered biophotons before that, but he was learning about the interplay with DNA and light. So in Cindy's book, she writes, Popp has demonstrated the DNA operates not only chemically, the long-standing theory, but as a level beyond. It essentially is a storage unit for light and a source of biophoton emission. So we've been told that there's junk DNA, right? Well, it's just stuff we haven't figured out. And it, during the last few years, I've been sort of really upset about this whole idea that people really understand what a cell does and what our DNA does, and they're reading DNA and stuff like that. So I'm going to tell you, there is so much more to you than you have any understanding around. So photons compose the electromagnetic spectrum. They drive the body's processes. At different frequencies, photons produce different effects. Popp and others maintain that the body is actually surrounded by a field of light, and that the DNA responds to and interacts with the various electromagnetic frequencies found in this field. And she says, we'll return to this concept several times in this book because each subtle energy structure interrelates with light, internally and externally. The physical body and its DNA rely upon light for health. Certain types of light cause problems while others are beneficial and even healing. Dr. Joan Smith's Sonneborn at the University of Wyoming exposed paramecia to far ultraviolet radiation, which caused DNA damage and shortened the cells' lives. When these injured organisms were exposed to near ultraviolet radiation, which is closer to visible light, the damage was repaired and the aging reversed. How does external light reach and affect us? So she cites several researchers here, David Jernigan and Samantha Joseph, exploring photons, and they discovered that they operate as waves and particles and enter the body primarily through the eyes. The eye translates light into electrochemical impulses for the brain's interpretation. The light proceeds into the body's crystalline matrix or fiber optic network. This is why crystals remind you of your power. And when you start limiting their function and saying this one does that and this one does that, you're limiting their function because there's so much that goes into with intent. And you are crystalline energy. Crystals remind you of who you are. By moving from the rods and cones into different sets of cells called the Mueller cells, the light accesses the crystal matrix of the body to reach every part of the body. The crystal matrix is interrelated with quantum fields of photons that pulse throughout the body. You pulse. Your cells are designed to emit light. So you'll see when we show in the film these dark patches, and you'll see them in people's auras, and it's the same thing with the BioWell device that the Dr. Korotkov that we're going to interview created. When there's breaks or spikes in the auric field, the energy's not flowing the way it should. So the crystal matrix is interrelated with quantum fields of photons that pulse throughout the body. These biophotons act upon the entire electromagnetic spectrum, transferring information through each of its layers. The movements are facilitated by the electromagnetic polarization of DNA, which acts as a guide to direct optical information. The electromagnetic and biophoton energies can either be coherent or incoherent. This coherency is at least partly within our control. Studies have shown that holding positive thoughts in our heart creates coherency between electromagnetic and biophoton emissions, which then changes the DNA so that our bodies are healthier. In other words, DNA can at least partly be controlled by thought. Thought fields, T fields, will be discussed in part 3 of this book. So that is a share I wanted to give you, and I'm going to share something else, because I saw it during this filming process. I didn't understand why in the early 1900s, these medical centers like at Harvard and Yale were using magnets, because they understood the body had ions that were moving around, and when there was disease present, they weren't moving correctly. And so they would bring magnets in to make sure the ions were flowing correctly. And if we were doing these types of things in medical school, how could we get to a place where we took a pill? I remember watching Phil Donahue back in the late 70s and 80s, and he was promoting a book on his show called Best Pills, Worst Pills. And there was a lot of drug interactions. You know, like the 3rd or 4th leading cause of death in the United States is drug interactions, right? Like there's so many drugs out there, we don't know how they interact with each other. And apparently the approvals to get them on the market are, I mean, who knows how that really works, right? Like, and pharmacists at the time didn't know, and I don't know if they know now, like a person's taking this, will interrelate this. So it's very important. So that Worst Pills, Best Pills book was very eye-opening to me as a high school person, okay? So I used it with my mom and my grandmother because they were getting these prescription meds. And so I would ask questions, and we would go in and we'd say, why don't we use this one? Why don't we use this one? Some were better than others. Some were closer to nature. I mean, herbalism, I mean, most pharmaceutical drugs, initially anyway, were mostly herbs. So anyway, so it's, why were we teaching these things at medical school with herbs and chiropractic and, you know, all these different things that understood that we are energy. And so 2 separate people, independent of each other, both told me that Rockefeller used his money to investigate medical schools to decide if he was going to invest in those and how he could make money. And so he started giving these $1 million grants, these very generous grants to medical schools, if they would only teach allopathic medicine. And he did this around the world. And supposedly the only place that didn't take the money was China. They refused his money. So just be very present. And I know every doctor I know got into medicine because they want to help people. And they would tell me, we get like a half hour of nutrition out of 8 years of school. Well, they get probably no information on chiropractic or osteopath stuff or, you know, herbalism or any of these types of things that relate back to the fact that we are energy. Like homeopathy is all about the energy of us. So anyway, I'll highlight some of this in the book that'll be part of the film. Blessings and love to you. Keep shining that beautiful inner light.